Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our latest HR Club. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Martin and I'm one of the directors of Narrow Key HR. We're delighted to be joined this morning by Sarah Cook. Sarah will introduce herself in a moment, so I will allow her to do that. But before we move across to Sarah, I just wanted to let you know about our next HR Club, which is going to be on the 19th of September. And that session is going to be on salaries and benefits and how you can align your employee value proposition to your organisational goals. And that will also be looking at different ways you might structure your pay and thoughts around that. And as I say, that will the invite to that next session will appear in the follow-up email that we send after this session. So I know Sarah's got a packed session for us today on how you can use executive coaching in your organisation. So I will hand over to Sarah. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome everybody to this morning's webinar on executive coaching. I'm delighted to be here. Sarah did say to me, have you got too many slides? This is my passion, so rather than omit any of the slides, I'm just going to talk really fast. So bear with me, it is being recorded, but if I was coaching you on how to present, it's not how I'm about to do it, but I was reluctant to leave anything out. Okay, so I'm an HR director, an executive coach, wife, mother to two teenagers, both of which are going through GCSE and A-level mocks at the moment, so some challenging times, but I like a challenge and we'll refer back to challenges throughout this session. Also, just will make one apology, brain fog is real for me at the moment, so if I lose my train of thought or you see me referring to my notes quite a bit, that is why. As an example, a couple of weeks ago, whilst unpacking food shopping and sorting the wash, that resulted in me finding a packet of rice in the tumble dryer several hours later. So bear with me. And before you all think, who is this mad woman who is oversharing, this does have a place in coaching, and I will refer to it later on in the session. So as I said, we have quite a bit to get through, so let's get started. What is executive coaching? I'm sure many of you have had coaching before or have organised coaching for people in your businesses. Many textbook definitions, but for me, executive coaching is helping individuals and teams tap into their skills and resources to become the best high-performing versions of themselves. And in that, I want to stress that it's not a one-size-fits-all. There's not right or wrong answers in coaching. It's all about developing that high performance in individuals or in teams, and high performance can look very different for each individual. We will again talk about that later on in the session. There's many different approaches that you can take to coaching, and there are lots of tools and models and things that coaches use. I do use them and they definitely have their place, but my preferred approach to coaching is the person-centered approach. And for that, that means for me developing that sort of rapport with the client. That is absolutely key to me. If you don't have the rapport, it can limit the success of the coaching. So that is absolutely key for me. And it should be, in my view, for the coachee, the client. And if it doesn't feel right, then I think both parties have to be brave from the outset and say, this isn't going to work. Because for me, when you develop that deep, lasting partnership, really, that trust, deep relationship, that's when you sort of create the magic. That's when the transformation comes. So that is very much my approach, and that might not be for everybody, and that's fine. That's part of determining whether we can work together or not. I would also say for any coach and for people just generally as leaders, try and remain curious and not judgmental. I learned a very valuable lesson in this area when I first started coaching, and did think actually with a coachee that I met that I wasn't going to be able to work with him. Just didn't feel right. That rapport didn't quite click. And I did think about, saying, was I the right coach for him? But gave it a go, threw myself into it, and it was a really rewarding experience for both of us. Still in touch now, and thoroughly enjoyed it. So that was just a really valuable lesson, I think, one worth noting for all of us. Coaching is very much about asking the right questions, and for the coachee, again, just generally for business leaders, kind of have to be a bit vulnerable. You have to let the walls down, let people in. I think when you're leading from a position of vulnerability, that creates openness, honesty, and that authenticity, and that's how people want to be led. So there is a little bit of kind of, you do need to let the walls down and let your true self come through in the sessions. Okay, executive coaching is not, for me, remedial action. We've all sort of been in that situation where we may have had to refer somebody for coaching. I just want you to have a read through those two different approaches, and it does have its place, and that's obviously what it's there for, to help people. But there are two very different approaches to how you would engage with somebody to enter into a coaching assignment on the slide. I know for a fact that I would prefer the second version, and hopefully you've had time to have a quick read of that. This leads into my next slide. Apologies for the title of this book, but I love this book. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but Jo is quite active on LinkedIn at the moment and has a real passion for helping businesses develop a coaching culture. And by that, I don't mean that they're paying for all of their managers to go off and do accreditations to become qualified coaches, which would be very expensive. It's more about upskilling managers to have coaching conversations. So just to flick back to that last slide, the second version on there is very much a coaching conversation. And that is what Jo is passionate about. And I thoroughly recommend this read. And I will try and drop in other recommendations for things to read throughout the session. But it's a very easy, quick read. And she goes through a 7-step framework of how to develop that coaching culture in your business. So I thoroughly recommend you have a quick read of that book. I just thought it'd be worth touching on mentoring, because sometimes people get confused as the difference between mentoring and coaching. Mentoring is very much, you pick a mentor on the basis of you're tapping into their experience and their knowledge and their expertise. So I'm mentoring somebody at the moment who has their career in HR, and they are trying to work towards director level. So she was very much interested in talking to me about my journey, how I made it to director, sort of some tips and strategies, and just somebody to sort of check in with regularly and talk through her plan with and her strategy as to how she's going to get there. So the mentee would very much ask the questions, and the mentor was very much allowed to give the answer and say, in my opinion, this is how you should do it. This is what I did. This is what worked for me. Whereas coaching is very much asking carefully crafted questions, listening very attentively. And I don't mean the kind of listening that you do when you're trying to juggle emails, cook dinner, listen to your teenagers recount their story of school that day. It's really intense listening, which is quite exhausting, but good exhausting. I love it, but you really, really do have to focus. So hopefully that is sort of kind of explain the difference between the two. Mention, yeah, that's kind of my word that I come up with for a mixture of the two. And I do tend to dip in and out of coaching and mentoring sometimes, but I would always ask the client if that's okay. So for instance, if they're in the middle of a coaching session and I'm constantly asking these questions and they just get stuck and say, can you just tell me the answer? Then I will say, look, I can offer you my opinion, but it's now going into mentoring, not coaching. So we just sort of make sure we're aware of that. And equally, I've got somebody at the moment who's, we'll talk about assignments and length of them in a second, but somebody signed up for 12 sessions, so that will be over a year. And very much the first part of that assignment, the first 6 months, would be mentoring, and then coaching for the second part. So they can work quite nicely alongside each other. Sorry, just one other thing to say on what coaching isn't. It isn't therapy and it isn't counselling. So it is inevitable that when you start talking about business coaching, it does impact on people's personal lives. They do enter into each other and cross over those boundaries, and that's fine, and that's just expected. But if there's any point in the session, because of my HR background, I'm very comfortable with having conversations with people about personal things. But if there's ever a risk of crossing over that boundary and me feeling that actually that's not something I'm qualified to help with, I can certainly signpost and recommend people to appropriate therapists or counsellors. I just thought it'd be worth mentioning team coaching. Whilst my focus mainly is on individual coaching, I don't think we should kind of overlook this. We're all very aware of various sporting teams across the world who have really benefited from coaching, and that's what sort of really makes them as a team. And it can work really, really well in the business world as well. If you think about our teams, mostly we're formed by default, so our reporting lines rather than by design. So if you're a new manager, you may inherit a team, and you haven't had much choice in picking those individuals. And as we all know, in team environments, you've got lots of different personalities, lots of different opinions, and that can be quite difficult. And sometimes a bit of team coaching can sort of help teams establish that psychologically safe space and start to unravel kind of bad practices or things that aren't working within the team, and sort of reknit themselves together to kind of reconnect, start building that trust and that deep collaboration. And when you get that working effectively, wow, that's when you get the power of team. But there will be sensitivities in that. So there's some carefully sort of crafted exercise that you can work through together to sort of get to that place. And when it happens and it works, it's really, really transformational. So some typical team coaching questions are just up on the slide now, and that's the sort of thing that I would work through with team members, perhaps in the lead up to the first session. And then it would be very much about doing some peer-to-peer coaching and thinking about developing some goals, some shared purposes, some sort of ways of communicating. Maybe I'll use the word rules, but just some guidelines about how the team is going to agree to work together, how they're going to communicate, how they're going to deal with any areas of conflict. And switching back to sort of my HR work, a lot of what I deal with and a lot of what my team deals with, if I'm honest, comes back to problems around communication. So I really do think it's worth investing in time in looking at that area in particular. But that just gives you a feel for some of the things that we could work through the team. I did refer to sort of models and techniques that coaches can use, and I do use them on occasion. This is one that I particularly like, the Johari window, which was designed by Joseph Luft and Harry Ingham in 1955. And this is a really useful visual, powerful tool to sort of help people with self-awareness and developing those deeper sort of trusting working relationships, and can work with an individual, but it can also work with teams. So it's basically made up of a quadrant, very self-explanatory, and what's across the sort of horizontal and down the vertical axes. And basically what you're trying to do is fill up each of these window panes, I call them. And in particular, you want to develop the arena. You want that one to be the largest one. And this is where you have all things that are both known to yourself and known to others. So this is where you are being open, honest, comfortable, and your team knows you very well and you know them very well. And as I said, that's the area that you want to spend time developing. The blind spot, and I'll just whiz through these, you could spend a lot of, and I'll just briefly explain how you could use it, but the blind spot is something that will come out of some really sort of hard sort of feedback, constructive feedback, and this is where you're asking questions and you might be unconsciously offending or upsetting people, not realizing it. So when you build that level of trust in your team, you can ask those questions and become much more aware of the things that you're perhaps doing that you didn't realize you were doing, and then make some conscious decisions to work through with a coach or a colleague or friend to how to sort of move those areas forward. And the facade is, I often talk about, try not to have a work you and a home you. Try to get to a place where you're just you and you can feel comfortable in that space. And the facade is very much breaking down those areas that where you're sort of hiding behind a mask and you're not sharing, you're not being open to team members about certain things or not displaying some of your behaviours. So it's a really interesting exercise that you can do as a team. You can sort of, it would take probably the team leader or somebody in the group to be brave and go first You can walk, sort of go around the group in a room and sort of share each other's thoughts on this, or you can do a little bit of work beforehand if you think it's going to be quite tricky to do in the session, but it's a really nice exercise to get some team coaching going. Okay, just talk a little bit about the process if you were to take up coaching. So going back to that rapport, which is essential for me, I always offer a free 20-minute discovery session. And that just allows exactly that, sort of a quick conversation to see whether you think you could work with each other. And that's really important to me. And if that goes well, I would then send a questionnaire to the coachee, asking some questions around things like, what are you stuck with? What's going well for you? What are you worrying about? Have you got anything big going on in work at the moment? Just to start getting a feel for some of the topics that you might want to look at in the coaching assignment. And then a tripartite setup. So many of you on the call, I guess, may be interested in coaching for people in your business, could be for yourself. But tripartite setups are when the employer has a vested interest in the coaching and has asked the coach to coach somebody in the business. And you may sit down together at the beginning and work out some themes, some objectives. It might be a senior person going for their next level of promotion and they're stuck on a few areas. So you would agree at the outset what those objectives should look like. And it might be that a business says, let's have some of the sessions focused around those areas, and then you can use the remainder of the sessions for your own sort of personal choice. What I would stress in that setup is obviously I can give feedback at a very top level in terms of themes and how the sessions are going, and I would suggest probably doing that halfway through an assignment and again at the end. But what I wouldn't be able to do is sort of repeat verbatim what's being discussed in the sessions. The sessions are 100% confidential between coach and coachee, so it can work, but obviously it's not detailed feedback. I certainly wouldn't repeat what was shared in the session. And then if all that works and everybody feels happy, there's the contracting stage. That's just literally that, just sharing terms and conditions. And then sort of thinking through how you want the delivery to look. So online works really, really well. Obviously, all of my coaching during lockdown was online, so I'm very used to that. Equally face-to-face, I love walk-in coaching. I've done this a couple of times and the individuals got so much from it. The only thing I would say is we should have taken a notepad, because particularly outdoorsy people, they just found that the creative side came out really, really quickly and ideas just kept flowing, and sort of had to dash back to the office and write down everything that we talked about. I would flag it's hard graft. So if you're going to do it, it's a huge investment, and if you're able to do it, your employer is paying for it, wow, you should be really sort of pleased that you're valued that much and invested in. It's a real benefit, and I would love it if everybody sort of engaged with coaching. I think everybody could benefit from coaching. But yes, you have to put the effort in, as I keep saying to my teenagers who are avoiding revision, is don't be disappointed with results you didn't get from the work you didn't do. Not so much the older one, the younger one. But you do have to put the work in, you do have to show up, you have to be present for the sessions. So no distractions, no phones. Pick a time in the day, the week, the month that you might be a bit quieter and that you can give it the focus that it needs and that it deserves. And I put the word homework up there. Sometimes I set things, some small activities or some things to just keep moving forwards in between sessions, just so that we can keep the momentum going. And part of the benefit of coaching is that accountability piece. So you're being held accountable. The coach should check in with you and sort of say, how are you getting on with X? And, I will always say to people, don't wait for the next session. If you're stuck and it's a quick conversation or a quick email, then just drop me a line. Okay, so I just thought probably the best way to spend the rest of our time is just to give you a little bit of a flavour for the sorts of things that you may do in some coaching sessions if you signed up. This is something I'm really, really keen and interested in doing with clients. So it's exactly that. So many of you will work for businesses that have strategy documents, vision, mission statements. This is exactly the same. But it's obviously for you, and it's your personal vision statements and values, non-negotiables, behaviours, whatever you want to call them. And it's a really nice session to work through with the client and to really sort of think through helping them come up with what their purpose is. This is mine, and what I would say is that actually it's changed several times over the last couple of years. So it's same as a business strategy. It's not set in stone. It's designed to evolve with you and where you are in life and in your career. But that's mine. As I said, it continuously evolves. And I think it's a really useful exercise to do with clients, in that it's a bit of a moral compass and lots of challenges that you then work through in different sessions and trying to make decisions about certain things that you need help with. It's really good to have this as a sort of a core and a foundation to keep coming back to and checking in, you know, does this align to my PVS? Is this what, if I make this decision and do this thing, is it something that's going to take me towards my end goal, and be true to my sort of statement and my values? And it's a really good sort of testing point to come back to several times. I think it also helps you think about what success means to you. So I think often the default scorecard for success for many of us, rightly or wrongly, is often talked about in sort of monetary terms. And it might not be, but for a lot of us, it tends to be defined in that way. And it's really useful to think through with a client, well, what does success look like for you? If it's money, fine, but let's think through together what sacrifices come with that, and are you willing to make those sacrifices? It might not be money, so let's look at what that looks like, and what does that journey need to look like. But it is a really useful way of sort of defining what success looks like for you as the individual. Okay, and then just some other common reasons why people may engage with coaching. Just read through those. So sometimes it's, you know, to help somebody to go for promotion, but equally I've worked with people who have gone for promotion and not got it for whatever reason. So it's sort of helping them recover from that setback, get a plan together, keep them momentum going, keep them motivated, and sort of get ready to go again. And my favourite one on here is just because you're brilliant and you deserve it. Coaching is amazing. Hopefully you can tell I'm really passionate about it. When else in life do you get that hour undivided attention from somebody who's just listening to you, with no interruptions, and you can just speak freely and openly? It's amazing. So many of you will probably be familiar with these areas, and they're very common blockers for clients that I see. It's not an exhaustive list by any means, but it tends to be around these areas, particularly imposter syndrome and procrastination, which we're going to look at. And yes, we are all different, thankfully, because it would be quite boring if I was coaching on the same thing all of the time. But yeah, these are the common sort of areas. So I have a confession to make. My guilty pleasure is watching Ted Lasso. For any of you who are familiar with the show, you may recall these quotes. If you're not familiar with the show, do watch it. You don't have to love football, just let me say that. But I love these quotes, and they definitely sing to the tune of coaching for me. And I love that sort of perfect is boring. And I think we all get caught up in this, you know, we have to be perfect, we have to do this, we have to do that. And actually, no, and the journey is a lot more interesting than the end and the outcome for me anyway. And that's where you see the development and the magic happening. So just thought I would share some of my favourite quotes from the show. And a lot of what we get stuck with and what leads to coaching is feeling sort of stuck, listening to that sort of voice on your shoulder saying you're not good enough, or those self-limiting beliefs that are just so crippling for so many of us. And it's just, it's really sad to see sometimes, and it's really rewarding to work through that with somebody and to get them over those hurdles. And often it is just ourselves getting in our own way. And when I say life script, I think many of us just live life in that, well, I'm doing this next because that's what's expected of me. That's what, you know, go through school. That's what my teachers wanted me to do, or that's what my employer wants me to do. That's what my partner wants me to do. That's what my friends want me to do. And we can often get stuck in that cycle and it's hard to lift your head or even have the time to lift your head to think, is that what I want my life script to look like? Am I just going through the motions, or do I really want something else, want something different? And that's, again, a really useful time to go back to your PVS and your values and question what you're doing. And that thing that, sorry, PQ stands for powerful question, if you see that dotted around on the slides. These are just sort of some of the questions that it's useful to ask in sessions where you're really trying to unpick with the client, that where are you trying to go, what's important to you, why are you trying to sort of create that change, what does that mean for you, what does that look like, and why have you not taken steps towards that? And at the bottom, doubt can only be removed by action, and that's what I encourage people to do. You kind of have to start somewhere, you have to take that first step. Okay, so IS stands for imposter syndrome, and we're just going to do this quick poll, and just if you could spend some time answering these questions. Oh, wow, okay. Quick fire questions. Okay, so look, imposter syndrome is real for so many people. Is somebody going to take that down? Okay. Yeah, imposter syndrome is real for so many of us, and people with imposter syndrome tend to, they're very, very hard on themselves. We all have a little bit of it. I think it can vary from person to person. But Michelle Obama had it when she became the First Lady. She was crippled by it. Einstein had it. So I think we're all okay, and I think we can all cope with a little bit of imposter syndrome. But this is often where people need some help. And living in this VUCA environment at the moment, imposter syndrome thrives. So when it's real, and it really can sort of cripple somebody, it impacts not just the individual, but the team, the business, and ultimately in a business profit. If somebody has it really bad, the knock-on effects around the team and the people around them is huge. So if we just move on and start looking at, sorry. Let me try and close that down. Sorry. Okay. And now, there we go. Oops. Sorry, the technical difficulty there. So I just thought it would be useful to look at a case study. This is somebody, changed the story slightly, but this was a real case that a client brought to me, and I'm sure many of you can sort of relate to this. This is fairly typical, and classic symptoms of somebody suffering with imposter syndrome are all those things up on the slide. And again, a lot of this, I think, can sort of link back to that life script again. The one on here that I thought most useful to focus on, because it tends to be the most common reason within the space of imposter syndrome, is fear of failure. I think we all have that at one point or the other in our lives. I loved this podcast. If any of you have listened to the High Performance podcast before, you may have listened to that episode. But if you haven't, it's a really useful platform to jump onto. A huge number of different people interviewed, but I particularly love this one on breaking down that fear of failure. And as I said, we all have it, and our brains are designed to be a protective tool. The amygdala is designed to protect us from social rejection, and so when you hear that voice on your shoulder, that's kind of imposter syndrome at its worst, and that fear of failure. So often with clients, what we do in that space of fear is kind of work through it, sort of name it, shine a light on it, and really start to ask those questions. Well, what are you afraid of? What's the worst that can happen? And what could you do if that happens? And how can I mitigate? And lots of the time, mitigation with fear of failure is about planning and preparing and putting that work in. But also, it's worth just trying to go through this with clients. Is that most failure is reversible. So If you think back to things in earlier years where you perhaps failed an exam or failed your driving test or whatever it is, it's all reversible. It's, it's a bigger thing for you than it is for anybody else, and you can sort of undo it. It might take a bit longer and it might be a bit of hard work, but it's mostly reversible. So don't overthink it and make it bigger than what it actually is. And the fear of failure is often the worst part of it. Is we fear getting things wrong, and actually that's where the growth comes from. That's where people really sort of try to sort of move forward, develop and transform. So I don't think we should get too hung up on getting things wrong. I think we should be a bit more like scientists who, when they get it wrong, they sort of readapt their formula, they go again, and they keep going until they find the solution. So if we could try and start thinking a bit more like scientists. And I always say, just take a step towards what you're trying to do, just small steps. And if you start walking the path, the route does appear. It just one step at a time and break it down. Okay, I'll go through all of those. When you hear about imposter syndrome, you can hear about it described in 4 particular ways. This is not, to say that that's the only areas of imposter syndrome. And you can be one of these 4, you can be a combination of all of them, but one of them tends to be a little bit stronger. So you may relate to some of these and see yourself here. The professor is that person that needs to be an expert, and they will steer away from challenges because they will be worried that they're not going to be seen as doing them perfectly. So they're the sort of people that won't apply for a job unless they can meet 100% of the job description. Perfectionists, see a lot of those, particularly in sort of legal sector. They've got to be 100% right 100% of the time. So they will avoid challenges where if there's any chance of them looking like slapdash, or they will find it hard to delegate. And this is the bit where it goes back to the impact on the individual, the team, the business, and profitability is huge. So if you've got somebody who just won't delegate to a team because they're a perfectionist, that's really damaging. Superhero, these are the people that tend to think, well, I'm not good enough, I lack superpowers, so I need to work crazy hours to make up for that. I always need to be at my desk to look good because I can't perform in other areas. And the soloist is somebody who would just see asking for help as a sign of failure, and it couldn't be more wrong. But they will sort of steer away from things if they think there's any chance that they need to tap into using anybody else, because they will see that as a sign of weakness. So you can see how all of this is really damaging to both the individual and the team and the business. So it's really rewarding to help an individual work through this and to help them overcome imposter syndrome. So there's just the good news is, as I said, we can work through it. There's lots of different activities and things that you can do alongside the careful questioning and active listening. I'll just pick on one because I'm conscious of time, but the 5-5-5 is really interesting. So you encourage the individual to pick 5 people that they really trust and that work closely with them. They design 5 questions, which they do with me, and it takes 5 minutes. So it's how they land that to the individuals, and we look at the message they send with the questions. And this is, would you be as generous as you could with your time? I'm asking you as somebody that I trust and that I hope would give me honest and valuable feedback. And then the questions, we can have a think about what they look like, but it might be, what's the one thing you think I could change to benefit my performance the most? Strengths and weaknesses, what one word describes me? We'll sort of have a bit of a brainstorm about what 5 questions they want to ask. And then the people give them the feedback. If they can give it face to face, and often get then the coachee to repeat back to the person giving them the feedback, the message they've given them, it can be really powerful. But equally, we can sort of go through the results in a discussion together if they've come back via email. Just a bit of a fun, just to bring out sort of, actually coaching can be quite fun and creative at times. Dr. Seuss, the story, Oh, the Places You'll Go, I've used that before to sort of bring to life for people sort of areas of imposter syndrome. That's really quite a fun technique. And just again to give you a bit of flavour for some of the questions that we might look at when trying to help somebody work through this area. And with coaching, it is about asking those questions at the right time. And there will often be, you know, periods of silence in a coaching session, and that's okay. And both parties need to be comfortable with that, because it gives the coachee the time to sort of really stop and reflect and think about their own performance in these areas. So that's something that takes a little bit of time to get used to, certainly for me, to sort of hold back and let the individual think about the answers for themselves. Okay, so this takes us on to our next area. Okay, we've got a bit of a mix. Ooh. Ooh. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so there's more of you that don't do this and do. Stop sharing that. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so just before we move on, I just wanted to say this can, so for me, in the early part of my career, I definitely had imposter syndrome more than procrastination. And weirdly, more recently, I'd say it's flipped. So these things can change as you go through different stages of your career. But yeah, procrastination is a real problem for me. So we'll just look at case study 2. I've just picked an example there that you might all be able to relate to or remember back when you were doing some studying, or maybe doing some studying now. I'm sure we've all been there with, and again, same applies to any sort of work projects or initiatives that you're working on at the moment. It's classic symptoms. Oh, that feels a bit too difficult. I'll put that off for now. You get caught up in any distractions but doing the task in hand. And then obviously it all becomes a bit last minute, and you go through that whole fear of failure thing again, last minute panic. And then when you do submit something, question how good it is and what the quality is like, and then you go through that whole regret and stress cycle. So it's a really hard thing to break. And there's often, you know, reasons why we're doing these things. We'll just sort of take a look at these now. We often all wait for the right moment to start these things. And I would say, you know, you just have to make that start. You have to take those small steps. Displacement behaviours are just, as I said, you'll fill your day with anything but doing the task that you should be doing. And that's almost excusing the fact that you haven't done the task that you should be doing. And you can convince yourself you've had a productive day and been busy, but you've been busy doing all the wrong things. And we often procrastinate, not because we're lazy, but sometimes for some of the reasons up there, that often the task just feels too overwhelming. I often sort of suffer from this, and it's a really useful process to go through with the client in terms of how you can break that down. And we'll talk about a few techniques now, but I love to say, and I heard on a podcast, I think, about what's the heaviest weight you're going to lift at the gym, and the answer was the front door. And it's very similar to what you're trying to do in work, is just make the start. If you get yourself to the gym and you're really talking yourself out of it in the morning, I'm too tired, don't want to go, just get yourself there, tell yourself, start the warm up, do 5 minutes. And if you really, really don't want to be there, you can come home. Chances are you've got yourself there, you've started. And once you start, you'll just keep going. And it's very similar to things in the work world. It's just make that start, just take those first few steps, give yourself that space and that time and that focus time, and it does happen. It's a lot about shifting the mindset. So we'll use that negative language to talk ourselves out of tasks. So I'm too busy, I'm too stressed, or I need to do this. I can't do that today. I know I should be, but I really need to do this. It's all sort of negative language. And if you can just change the dial on that language to things like, you know, what's today's adventure? What does my list look like today? What's the single most important thing I need to do today? And come on, I've got this. Come on, I can do this. There's just that shift in mindset can often help you just take that first step. And then I just wanted to run through some sort of quick techniques just before I start those. Another one that's useful to use is just to plot a line across your page, and above the line record all the things that you've done in a day, and below the line, all the things that you've walked away from or avoided. And often it's useful to plot the time of day that you've done those things as well. And just to sort of look at, with your coach or whoever you're working with, are there some emerging patterns here? Is it the type of task that you tend to do more that sits above the line? What does that look like? What's that telling you about what you should be doing? And again, how does that relate back to your PBS and your values? But looking at the time of day as well, often we'll have kind of optimum times of the day and the week where we find it easier to do some of those focused tasks. For me, I'm a morning person, sort of post 4 o'clock, my brain is just mush. But if you get me up working at 6 in the morning, I'm firing stuff out. So probably that's because it was teenagers waking up time. So it's just complete me time, focus time. So it's worth sort of thinking about when you work at your peak. And, you know, it's a known fact that, you know, dieting or whatever it is you're doing, willpower diminishes throughout the day. So just be very mindful about what that optimum period is for you. And then there's some quick sort of easy tasks here to do, sort of what I call one in, one out system. So if you just kind of write a bucket list, if you had unlimited time and you just kind of just jotted down everything that ideally you would like to be doing or achieving, and then put across to a sort of an essential list of 3 to 7, probably 5 is your optimum number of things that need to sit on the essential list. And then you work through the essential list first. Don't get rid of the bucket list, because the process of one in, one out is exactly that. So as you start to work through the essentials, which sometimes might be the things that you don't actually want to be doing, you want to be doing some of the more fun things on the bucket list, you pull them across. So there's the motivation that if I just get some of these things fired out today, I can then pull this across and start working on that thing that I feel really excited about. Or that's also another useful way of questioning, well, why am I working on these things and not that thing that really excites me or ignites my passion? Another useful tip is to just print off a Google Calendar, print out whatever you use. And I use this to sort of come up with what your ideal week looks like. And you chunk out the days, so both for personal and professional tasks, and you just build out what that ideal week looks like. So you've factored in some exercise time or whatever it is you do in your downtime, family time, the really essential tasks from your one in, one out list, and projects that you're working on or hobbies, whatever. Just plot it into that week. And then when you get asked if you want to do something, or can you do this task, or can you do this presentation, or you have to really question whether you say yes to that task. Look at your ideal week and think, okay, if I say yes to that, what has to come out of this ideal week? And then that helps you really sort of question, which one am I going to decide on? Which one is going to help me get towards my vision, my end goals, where I'm aiming to be? Which ones are essential? And you can't put it in there until you take something out. So it's useful to go through that exercise. The thing is, with to-do lists, you can just keep adding to them endlessly, and then they do become overwhelming, and often you just don't get to sort of do half the things on them, whereas you can't keep putting into a calendar that's sort of got a open and close time each day. And then ABC, just a useful technique as well, is a little bit the same as the ideal week, is have a kind of an ideal day and have it on an ABC level. So your A day is your absolute prime optimum day, where you are just smashing everything out. You are doing your exercise, you're spending quality time with your family, you're learning about that new thing at work, you're spending time with your team, just everything flows and everything's perfect and you feel like you've got it all. Be realistic, we're not all going to have many of those days, and they're not going to happen every day all week. So then design what looks like a kind of medium day for you, which is your B day. And you know, it might be that I'm just going to keep referring back to things that kind of are on my list. It might be that your workout time, your exercise time has to cut in half because you've got to jump on a train and go to London for the day. So it's kind of not quite your A day, but it's still doing those things that are important to you. And then always have a C day, because this is when things really, you know, kind of go to pot and nothing goes right. And you might be staying away in a hotel. It means that you don't eat the things you want to eat. You're not sleeping perhaps the way that you normally sleep. You don't have the time to do the exercise to start your day, whatever it is. but have a worst case scenario day of just some of those key things that are important to you in your life and what you're trying to work through professionally, that you just do some of it, even if it's really, really low levels. It's better than zero. And if you let too many 0 days happen, you undo all the good, all the behaviours, all the changes that you've created. And then it's easy to just fall back into that cycle of all of those things you're trying to work towards and tick off of your list just fall by the wayside again. And I've just got a few more PQs there at the end, the sorts of things that we talk about when we're trying to help somebody work through crippling area of procrastination. Well, it certainly is for me. Bear with me, I am nearly there. We'll just whiz through this. This is another tool that's really useful to use for procrastination. And I won't go through it all because we are running out of time, but it's a really useful way of getting people to plot certain tasks in each of those window panes to help them sort of really work through priorities and what they need to work on first. And it feels really great when you can put quite a lot in quadrant 3, and you can just get rid of some of those things that are just sat on your list and why. So that's a really useful tool. This is a really useful exercise, and I don't mean it to sound morbid, but when you're plotting your PVS and your values, it's also really good to sort of flip to the end of your life or think about what sort of legacy you want to leave behind. And it's a really, enlightening thing to do. Somebody mentioned this to me, so I had a go at doing it a couple of weeks ago, and I thought I'd pop it in here. But it's a really good thing to come back to all of the time and test what you're doing on a daily basis. Is it moving you towards what you want to be remembered for, what you want to achieve in life? And it really is a useful sort of anchor to keep coming back to, as is the PVS. I have to read it in full. It's not that interesting. I think it is, but obviously have a go at writing your own. It's a really nice thing to do. It's not morbid. And then, sorry if you haven't quite read it. I'm just going to finish on my guilty pleasure again. So just again, if you haven't watched the show, the quotes won't mean much to you, but I love these 5 lessons. It's really a show about decency. It really is. There's some great things in there, some really good life lessons. But for me, if you keep these 5 things at your core, it really helps with working through a lot of really difficult decisions and obstacles that come your way in a bit more of a fun way, making you feel like you've got ownership and control back of your life and your destiny and where you're trying to go and what you're trying to achieve. I love number 4. Even if you've not watched the show, everybody knows Woody and Buzz. And conflict is huge. And again, a lot of time, particularly in my HR world, because at the beginning, I'm helping people with communication and often conflict. Okay. I think I just about did it in the time that I was allowed, and apologies for talking so loudly.
No, you
so
did
quickly.
brilliant. Thank you, Sarah, so much. That was really interesting, and I think I recognise a few of those behaviours in myself from time to time. And I've had some coaching in the past, which was funded by my employer, and I've got to say I found it immensely valuable and a really positive experience. And as speaking as an employee who's received or been offered and had some coaching, it feels like a great investment that's been made in you as an individual, which I think is, certainly speaking for myself, is really appreciated. We've got 10 minutes and we've allowed some time for some Q&A. So if anybody has got any questions they would like to ask Sarah, then please do pop them in the Q&A box. You can do that anonymously if you would prefer, and I will keep track of those and ask them as they come up. Just one from me, Sarah. You mentioned the High Performing podcast, I think it was, and Pippa Grange.
Yes,
I think Pippa Grange is brilliant. Sorry, I should have put my camera. And I've seen and read some of her, heard some of her podcasts over time. Is there anyone else you would, if people are interested in this subject and some of the issues that you've talked about. I appreciate I'm slightly putting you on the spot, and you may want to follow that up after
I
the
mean,
session. Is there
I
anything else
mean,
you recommend?
in terms of the fear one in particular, I would say I've listened and read quite a bit, because it does play into so much of what I talk about with clients and in my HR role as well. But I think that podcast is a really good, it's the best I've heard and sort of found useful and could relate to. But in terms of other areas, that podcast I would highly recommend. You can find most things on there, and they bring it to life in a really it is people's real life stories, and it's fascinating. It's business people, it's authors, it's singers, it's sports people, and they just bring to life so many different areas of life that we all struggle with. And if you can do it, you can access the podcast free of charge, but then obviously you get the adverts. And if you pay, it's something like £6 a month or something, you get sort of a different sort of access to it. And they've really developed it so that you can go in and search certain areas that you're looking for inspiration on, or you can search by whether it's sport, business, music, that type of thing. So I thoroughly recommend. It's a really, really useful starting point for most of the things that sort of come up in the coaching world. I'm fascinated. It's something that I tried to do in terms of creating, and I'll come on to that in creating good habits for the last year. I've tried to every day aim to walk 10,000 steps. It's not always 10,000 steps, because it depends how much I've got on, but something better than nothing. And it's always accompanied by a podcast from High Performance. I love it. It's just really empowering. It's great to hear people, and when you hear sort of professionals and famous people sort of struggling with everyday things like we all do, it's fascinating. It's really inspiring. So I would say definitely start there for most of these topics. I loved James Clear. He's also been on the podcast. His Atomic Habits book. I'm sure many people have heard of that. Break the Mold by Tim Roberts. That's fascinating. I'm in the middle of that at the moment. Also, the book I mentioned in the session from Joe Wright was just brilliant. HR people will love reading that in particular. So yeah, there's I would definitely say start with the podcast and sort of go through the search engine, because just endless amounts of material in there. And different, they've developed some really sort of quick, short, sharp ones as well. So they're not all sort of an hour plus long now. They've got some really sort of quick, snappy ones on, all these sorts of areas and more that we talked about today.
Brilliant, thank you, Sarah. So that's it's the High Performance Podcast. Somebody's asked what the name of the podcast is. High Performance Podcast. Thank you.
High Performance Podcast, yeah.
How many sessions of coaching would you usually recommend as a starting point?
Yes, sorry, I did forget to mention that. So when we talk about coaching assignments, an assignment is usually about 6 sessions. But as I mentioned, I'm in the process of delivering a sort of year-long one at the moment, but they tend to be 6 sessions, and I would recommend probably doing the sessions every 3 to 4 weeks. It can be more frequent if you've got perhaps a big deadline coming up, or you're working towards a promotion and you've got quite a lot that you want to get through. You could sort of do them fortnightly, but usually I would recommend every 3 to 4 weeks. And as I said, I do sometimes set the clients some homework or some activities to do to sort of keep them going in that gap between sessions, to keep the momentum going. And I always offer, look, if it's just a quick sort of phone call or an email and you just get a bit stuck, or you just something has cropped up for you that's kind of really thrown you off track, just pick up the phone, drop me an email, and we can just catch up quickly, rather than wait until the next session and sort of just stay stuck, which is horrible.
I've got a question here which I've sort of taken in 2 different ways. So I'm going to ask it in 2 different ways. The first part, the way I've interpreted this, is if you are an HR director or the person responsible for HR in your organisation, and you are keen to introduce coaching across and sell it, I guess, to your directors, decision makers, how would you go about doing that? Have you got any tips for getting that sort of important buy-in?
I mean, I'll give you my opinion, but honestly, I can't recommend Joe Wright's book highly enough. It does exactly that. It takes, in particular, an HR person through that 7-step framework of how to sell it, how to sort of set it up. It's such a straightforward, easy read, and there's so many valuable things in there. Lots of case studies of things that Joe has witnessed, and sort of so many HR people will relate to it. So I would say start with that book. It's really, really good. It kind of spells it all out for you. But for me, I think it's you've got to try and get that hook in, haven't you? So most of us are in our HR roles, so trying to help the business be successful through their people. So, whether it's to, help with performance and making sure your people are performing optimally and effectively, and coaching plays a huge part in that. So I think it's sort of trying to focus on what the outcome could be and how it affects the bottom line, rather than it come across as an HRE type lovely thing to do. Wouldn't that be nice for everyone to go and have nice sort of cozy chats? It's hard work. If you're coaching somebody effectively, it really does push people to their limits and to their boundaries in a safe space. But the rewards that a business will get back from people performing at a higher level, and as I said in the session, it's like really useful to sort of revert back to those people that are brilliant at so many aspects of their job, but it just might be imposter syndrome or one or two things that are just holding them back from being even better, which, let's face it, it's not just going to benefit the individual, it's going to benefit the business. So I think it's trying to educate the board or the directors about the outcome for them and what successful coaching may bring to their individuals and to their business, what difference it can make to profitability and outcomes. So it's win-win. It's the individual gains so much from coaching, but so does the business. But that book is brilliant. I can thoroughly recommend it.
Is that the book that you for some reason I feel loath to say the title?
I know, and there is a story.
No more shit managers.
Yes, and there is a story behind why she called it that. Is quite interesting. She does talk about it in the book, but that book is a thin book. It's a quick read. You could do it in a couple of nights, bedtime reading. But it's so relatable. It's so good, so straightforward. Just quick 7 steps of how to set that framework up. I have to thoroughly recommend it.
Yeah, and I think the other part of the question is really around your journey and your journey to becoming a coach, and how you sort of went on that journey, which I don't know that we're going to have time to necessarily cover, but I wonder if it might be a good idea to link you up with the lady. We might have a sort of a time for a quick version of how you I suppose what drew you to it in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, a really, really quick, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about it in more detail, but I think a lot of what I talked about just, I think I got to a place where I was a bit stuck. This was pre-COVID. I was still enjoying my job as my HR director role, but felt like something was missing. I don't know, I just kind of had that calling that I felt like I wanted to do something else, something alongside. What could I do that would sit alongside my day job? And I felt like I was already doing it to some extent in the help that I give to people individually already, but just felt there wasn't the substance or the qualification behind it. So yeah, and I remember going to a webinar and seeing this fantastic guy over at the Watershed in Bristol, and he was a coach, and I came away from that and thought, I think that's what I want to do. And yeah, it just kind of came to me, and then it was just the journey. I had quite a few things going on personally at the time, and it was just a really good time for me to focus on me and to focus on, what was I about, what was my purpose, what did I enjoy doing, what really ignited passion and energy in me. And it was about helping people and helping people become successful and progress, and it just was something that sat nicely alongside my day job. So yeah, I set off to do my master's in coaching, and didn't quite anticipate how hard it was going to be. Did feel like going back to university, and it did coincide with COVID. So it was an 18-month-long course, and it did fall in the middle of COVID. So my day trips to UE switched to online, and it was incredibly hard. And I don't think I surfaced for months trying to get all the assignments done. at the same time as trying to get to grips with furloughing. So yeah, it was probably looking back on it, probably kind of informally coached myself through that process. It was hard work, but so rewarding, and I don't have any regrets. And it's starting to sort of set the path for how I want the future to look. So yeah, it's been a difficult but very rewarding journey.
Oh, thank you. It's been really interesting. Thank you so much. I'm conscious that we've just tipped over past 10 and people have probably got busy days to get off to. So we'll bring the webinar to a close. There will be a feedback slide. There we go. That's just popped up. Thank you very much for that, Romany. If people could give us some feedback, that would be really appreciated. It's always really valuable. But I'll bring this to a close and say thank you very much for coming along. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.